one of the open source conferences, but greatly appreciate this opportunity just to come and spend a few minutes. Most of you probably may know CableLabs from our participation with the OpenDaylight project with Chris Donnelly and Ariane and the other people at CableLabs that are involved. But the stat that I always like to point out to CableLabs is more than 50% of US homes have at least one CableLabs technology, and I'm going to bet 99% of the customers don't even know it exists. So we are the R&D lab. Think of us as the Bell Labs for the cable industry. And what I'm going to share with you is some perspective on what we call innovating the network. What is the transformational steps and activities that we're involved with, but also where we see some of the challenges facing the network given the cable industry's footprint. So 97% of all homes in the US have cable passing before them. CableLabs now is operating in 31 countries, helping 55 of the largest cable operators deploy. We are a nonprofit. We don't build product. We build intellectual properties that we license royalty-free to the vendor community to build their products to provide to the cable industry as a whole. So when you think about innovation and the way we think about innovation, we are trying to solve two problems. One is the innovation gap, and the other is the innovation delay. And when we talk about the innovation gap, the gap is that supply or lack of supply of those really great, game-changing breakthrough ideas. Those things are going to be truly transformative. We can come up with lots of ideas. Where's the supply of really great ideas? Once you've identified those great breakthrough ideas, the second challenge is the innovation delay. How long does it take from the point that you've identified that idea to actually get it deployed? And how do we move that bar forward? And what I'm going to talk about here is give you a little bit of some of the changes that we're seeing and facing, and then some quick thoughts on the OpenDaylight project and how we're seeing that move forward. Let's face it, the innovation is accelerating. The consumer pull for the next new gadget, that next new thing, is not slowing down, right? Think back a couple of iterations ago with the Apple iPhone. When everybody was anticipating the new iPhone and it didn't appear, what happened to the Apple share price? Took a hit. Albeit Apple never even announced they were even doing a phone. But there's this consumer expectation, the pull of innovation is accelerating, and it's causing everybody to have to find ways to move much faster than you've ever have as far as bringing that new shiny object to the market. We focus on looking at what we call exponential technologies. These are the foundational things that everything else gets built upon. This is what drives this innovation acceleration rate from a standpoint of the fundamentals. So for instance, when you think about, in the semiconductor space, just think about some of the changes that we've had from the standpoint of the pricing. In 1989, it was $220 per million transistors to produce a semiconductor. In 2015, that's now 3 cents per million. Getting down to the point where the semiconductor component cost of any device is pretty minimal. When you think about in the same as far as storage, in 1989, we were $569 per gigabyte. Right? In 2015, that's now 2 cents per gigabyte as far as that cost reduction and increased capacity. And we think about network speeds. And we don't think of network speeds traditionally in the form of those kinds of exponentials, but in 1989, it was $800 per gigabit. Now this is pure transit cost, so this is not consumer pricing. This is the cost of a gigabit in a pure transit cost wholesale model. So that's $800. 2015, that's 63 cents per gigabit in transit costs. So these fundamental changes, these exponential technologies that are accelerating both in speed and performance, but also in this reduction of cost, is what's feeding this innovation acceleration rate that we are now seeing. And in the case of the exponential innovations, those are those things that are built on top of these technologies, right? Now I spent, probably the last 15, 20 years of my career in the sole role of trying to predict what is that 5 years out going to look like? What is that 10 years out going to look like? What's that 20 years going to look out? And let me tell you, it's getting harder and harder to even see beyond the 2 years. Because of this such reduction in cost and the cost that it even takes for a company to get established, to come up with a new product, to come up with a new service, to launch something is becoming so inexpensive, we see this absolute explosion of new technologies. I spent many years here in Silicon Valley, spent 10 years here in the Valley working at Hewlett-Packard. Moved to Colorado. Used to think Silicon Valley was kind of the center of the universe. You go to Colorado, and you got Boulder, right? You got Austin, you got Boston. I advise a bunch of companies in Europe, Paris in particular. In the old part town of Paris now is turning into its own. The amazing amount and the rate of innovations that startup companies are bringing is just absolutely mind-boggling. And part of this is driven by what I call the device explosion. At HP, I ran the R&D CTO role for about a third of HP's $120 billion in revenue. Focused a lot in consumer products, such as computers, such as handheld mobile phones, like Palm devices, et cetera. And you used to think that was the center of the universe, but when we see the absolute explosion of new devices coming onto the market, it's just absolutely mind-boggling from the standpoint of just the sheer volume. The one common factor for every one of those devices coming on is that there's a network. There's some network that all these devices are going to attach to. And as we add more devices, particularly at that edge of the network, devices people bringing into their homes, the vehicles, et cetera, that adds a huge amount of complexity to running, operating, maintaining the network. But each one of these devices is dependent that a network actually exists. Just to put it in context, we talk about autonomous vehicles as kind of the big thing coming. Autonomous, self-driving, connected cars. Working with a number of the CTOs of the leading auto manufacturers, when you think about how much data the car, when it pulls into your driveway, needs to upload and download over a 30-day period just to keep itself updated. Best guesses at this point is you're talking between 50 and 75 gigabytes a month. So that means you're coming home, you park that car in that garage, that car connects to your in-home network, and it's transmitting, uploading data and downloading data for its updates. So think about everybody in your neighborhood pulling into the parking lot, all doing it at the exact same time, right when you're trying to walk into your house in order to access your network. It's those kinds of devices. We tend to think of devices being really small and not delivering a bunch of data, but there are some devices, such as automobiles, that when they attach to that in-network in the evening or overnight, they're pumping a lot of data. But then you start multiplying it just by this sheer number. The other piece that this leads into is what we call the experience explosion. Now, for those of you who are over the age of 35, you will be quickly scanning all these devices and it'll be nostalgic. I picked these devices for a very particular reason. It's basically for those of us who grew up in some of the earlier phases, right? Yes, there is a mini disc player up there. Yes, there's an old HP Jornada up there, which if you don't know what a Jornada is, I'll educate you later. The point here, though, is that we are now interacting with more and more devices. It's no longer we just have the one device, a desktop sitting on our desk that you go to work and you set and you work on. We are actually bringing a whole plethora of devices and experiences. And again, this puts a significant burden onto the network. How do you manage all those devices? How do you manage all those experiences? And how do you make that experience from an end-to-end perspective seamless and something that meets the needs? Because customers don't buy these devices. Well, I shouldn't say that here in Silicon Valley. Those of us in Silicon Valley probably buy these devices because we like devices. But most of the population does not buy devices for the device. They buy the device because it solves a problem. They don't buy products, they buy solutions. And so how do we enable that from the standpoint of the solutions? So let's fast forward it a little bit to 10 years out. Part of the work that we've been looking at is what are those new kinds of experiences that are sitting out at the edge. In the upper left-hand corner on this slide, this was some early work done a number of years ago on basically the equivalent of, think of it as a Post-it note that has video capability and wireless connectivity built into them. So literally, you have a wireless video capabilities anywhere in the world. Going across the top, you got augmented reality, which we're seeing today. That's actually through a see-through LCD display. High-density memory, work in haptics, touch-sensitive technologies, downright, 3D printing. We've seen all these kinds of technologies before, and we've all kind of tried to understand what those challenges and those issues are going to be. Flexible display, new kinds of immersive workspaces, which include immersive kinds of video capabilities. And then one that the cable industry is particularly interested in is advertising, right? The fact that you can literally sell any spot anywhere in the ad, whether it be product placements or actual monetizing all pieces of these kinds of technologies. And again, the challenge being for the overall industry is this challenge of the network. How do we bring all of these capabilities together? To date, when you look, we actually at CableLabs, we spent a lot of time looking at real live usage data coming across the cable networks on a worldwide basis. We are actually the receiving point of all that data, and we do a huge amount of analytics on it to look at bandwidth growth and when do we cross over in certain key critical points. And I've said this publicly, so there's nothing new being revealed here today, but if you were to look at current bandwidth offerings, people out there offering ISP services to your home or to your business, and you look at speed utilization, we're seeing this huge acceleration for gigabit networks, right? We've seen it. There's now, I don't know, I've lost track. We're probably into the 24 ISPs that have some form of gigabit offering here in the United States. And if you're fortunate enough to live in certain foreign countries, you've had gigabit services in some of those locations, such as Hong Kong or in Korea for quite some time. But here in the US, when we think about gigabit services, we're seeing still not as big of growth in the actual usage. People are buying gigabit services, but we're not seeing people actually using gigabit services. So the question we always ask ourselves, and the question we get asked all the time is, what's that service? What are those things that are going to come onto the network that are going to drive that demand, that are going to drive the complexity that we're seeing into the network? And we're seeing a couple things. One is interestingly enough, one of the more popular ones in some consumer testing that we're still in the process of doing is virtual reality. We're seeing we've done a series of consumer tests with 360 content on VR, and the consumer adoption on that is literally off the scale from the standpoint of consumer interest. And it's not niche-y, or it's they like it for 2 minutes because they think it's cool. We're talking long-form content, extended viewing, types of things. But the question that we still get asked a lot is what beyond that? And for us, it goes back to that slide just showing the sheer number of devices that we have out there. So, talking about innovating the network, how do you meet, what is it the changes that we're going to make in the network, or we need to make in the network to really make this happen? Well, one is we're focusing on what we call exponential bandwidth. Just like we talked about exponential technologies, it is about exponential bandwidth. We may not know what that new service is, But I'm going to trust that there's a lot of really smart people in this room, and there's a lot of really smart people in Silicon Valley, and in Boulder, and in Austin, and Boston, and Paris, Hong Kong, Tokyo, that are working on this. In the case of CableLabs, many people of you probably think of us as being that black coaxial cable coming out of your wall or going into the side of your house. But interesting statistic is cable is the leading broadband provider to consumers, and 75% of all wireless data goes over Wi-Fi, and 80% of that Wi-Fi traffic goes over cable. So you think about your mobile, you think about it in the hotel here connecting to the Wi-Fi, you think about public access points at venues such as Levi Stadium or over at, well, I guess it used to be called the HP Pavilion. I don't even know what they call it. SAP, I think, now has the naming rights for it, right? All that Wi-Fi content. So part of this is being able to stitch together the complexity of this network of both the wireline and the wireless. This particular image, that's the ruler on the bottom, that is getting to be about 1 inch on scale. And this is a massive MIMO antenna array that's looking to how do you radically get to an exponential scale of bandwidth in a very, 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 very small footprint, making it available for mobile platforms, those types of things. Today, we're seeing 1 gig services roll out. By 2020, 2021, 1 gig will be pretty much standard footprint throughout the US. And that's not just cable, that's pretty much all the ISPs are marching to that kind of play. And it's not going to be too far after that. We'll see the jump to multi-gig, so 2 gigs, 8 gig, 10 gig, and beyond. Wireless always lags, but we're seeing, again, exponential growth in the network. And as we add this exponential growth, what happens is it's just the sheer number of devices that are going to be coming into the overall network. And so back to our point on the innovation gap and the innovation delay. The innovation gap challenge that we have is, I don't think it's a challenge. We don't lack for ideas, right? At CableLabs, we've been working in SDN NFV for quite some time. We've showed some early prototypes a year and a half ago at our winter conference in Orlando on virtual CPE work that we're doing. So I don't think the innovation gap is the challenge. The problem today that we face and our industry faces is the innovation delay. The ability to take whatever idea is thrown onto the table and make it real as fast as possible. My board consists of 14 CEOs of the largest cable operators in the world. And the number one frustration of the cable operators, it's the number one frustration of any ISP out there is they don't lack for their product guys coming up with ideas. They can't make it real fast enough. The networks are rigid. The networks are hard to change. The interactions with the back office systems. Look, I spent 10 years of my early part of my career in the OSS and BSS platforms, right? That's like the furnace room. Nobody ever wants to do work with OSSs and BSS platforms. You're down on the bottom shoveling coal into the engine to keep the thing running. Yet it controls 100% of the cash flow of an operator. That becomes the pinch point of launching any new kinds of products or any kinds of new services. So we don't suffer from an industry perspective on gap. Lots of ideas. What's killing our ability to deliver new products and services, and again, I'm not speaking for the cable industry, I'm speaking for ISPs in general. Wireless, Wi-Fi, WISP providers, cable operators, incumbent LECs, the number one thing that is killing them is the innovation delay. Getting those new products and services into the markets as fast as possible. And for us, that's why we've been involved with the OpenDaylight project, why we've been focused on the SDN and NFV. We don't see an alternative to solving the innovation delay. The traditional legacy networks, fixed infrastructures, is not the path that allows us to address the absolute explosion of devices, the explosion of complexity of those devices, the explosion of the experience of those devices, the ability to converge both that wireless and wireline network into a single experience, to be able to add new capabilities to that network at a moment's notice. This is what we see as a way, once and for all, rather than doing the bubblegum and baling wire, right? If any of you work at an ISP, or if you want to go look at an ISP, let me know. We'll see what we can show you. It's not pretty behind the scenes, right? And so for us, SDN NFV is absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical for the future of being able to keep up with the pace of innovation change, the innovation rate that we need to be operating at, just given the level of innovation of devices coming into people's homes. It's not like as an ISP, we get to control every device a consumer wants to bring in, right? Think about it. 5 years ago, average number of devices in the home averaged about 3. 2 years ago, we were at 8. Today, we're north of 20. In fact, I gave a speech, I guess it was about a year ago at CES. It was Kara Swisher's panel, and she asked everybody on the panel to go through your house and count how many devices you had attached to the network. Okay? I'm a former HP CTO. I should know my number, right? I estimated the number. I ran around my house and counted, went to my Wi-Fi access point, looked up all the Macs that connected to my device. I was off by a factor of 2. I had 2 times more devices than even I thought I had sitting in the home, connected. So the device, that innovation gap is already out there running. People are coming up with those devices. We as an industry, we're challenged in, we're playing catch up. We're trying to create networks to support those new devices, to support those new capabilities. Whether it be automobiles, whether it be consumer devices in the pocket, whether it be appliances in the home, or whether it be other kinds of capabilities in the space. So we're excited about projects like OpenDaylight that get broad adoption. At CableLabs, we don't build product, right? You can't order a CableLabs widget. If you get your broadband services from a cable operator, what I will ask you to do is go home, go into the wiring closet, pick up your cable modem, and turn it over. That's where you'll see the CableLabs logo. We're the inventors of DOCSIS, which is the technology that brings high-speed data. We're the inventor of packet cable, voice over cable. We don't build anything. Our role is as an influencer, working with the vendor communities, the ISPs, to help solve the problems for end customers. And for us, we're committing a lot of our best people to projects like OpenDaylight in order to make sure that these technologies are made available so that we can help speed up that innovation rate back into the cable industry. So what I'm committing here to the OpenDaylight team is that CableLabs is committed. We've got our best and brightest on this, right? We're committed to helping the vendor community that's working in OpenDaylight products to help bring those into the cable industry, working with the 55 largest cable operators around the world that we're engaged with, that are members that fund us. We get paid as a funding model from the cable industry. We're committed to helping the vendors make that a reality. We're also committed to helping use our resources and our expertise in certification and testing. We do device certification and testing, everything from Wi-Fi access points to cable modems to a whole range of devices. And the cable industry likes to test things before they deploy into the network. Our role is we want to make that as easy as possible so that vendors get their products into play as quickly as possible, because that's the only way we're going to address this innovation gap and, more importantly, this innovation delay. So with that, I'm going to wrap up here. I want to thank you for your time. If you're interested in more information, you can contact me, or you can go to CableLabs.com, or you can hoodwink Chris Donnelly, who runs our SDN NFV research team at CableLabs, and Ariane over here runs all of our open source and industry standards activities and interfaces with all those groups around the world. And we would love to hear from you. If you've got thoughts, feedbacks, ideas, things that we can do to make it easier for you, if you're a vendor building product or if you're in the open source community contributing, if there's things that we can do to help or things that we can do to make that easier so that we can speed up the process of addressing the innovation gap and the innovation delay, that's absolutely critical for our industry. With that, thank you very much.